In our news bulletin for this evening, local businesses raise concerns regarding government's tender processes. A new Justice of the Peace was sworn in to Niue's judiciary last week. Niue's High Court is in session this week, starting with civil and criminal matters before proceeding with land courts. Some local businesses have raised concerns about the public tender process, calling on the Niue Chamber of Commerce to take a stronger approach to represent the interests of private sector, as is their mandate. The Niue Tender Board is appointed by Cabinet. The chairperson is a member of the Legislative Assembly. There is a representative from the Treasury Department, a representative from the private sector, and the Niue Chamber of Commerce serves as a secretarial role. A local business person and representative of businesses affected raised concerns about the lack of legal protection for businesses in this public tender process.
My concern is not about the tender being unsuccessful, because all of us that submitted tenders, all legitimate local businesses and perhaps even some overseas businesses who submitted tenders, none of us was successful. So the issue is not about whether or not one of us was successful or not. The issue is about the lack of transparency and the unethical process, and the lack of respect for the integrity of the public process by a public institution, that is a board of the new government. That is the issue here. The issue here isn't about whether or not we were successful. No. What I want to bring to the fore is the fact that this has been ongoing for a very long time, that there is a tender board. There is representation of the private sector within that board. The Chamber of Commerce is the secretariat of that board, and yet there is no transparency. There is no ethical standards applied by this board. And furthermore, anecdotal evidence, and we know that Niue is such a small place, you can't hide the fact that Cabinet is the final decision-making body when it comes to tenders. So there is that political element, and we cannot ignore that. The fact that Cabinet can overrule a tender board, again, speaks of issues, and these are legitimate issues. This is not about whether or not we got the tender. I am speaking on behalf of the businesses that have gone through this process unfairly for a very long time.
According to a member from the Tender Board, they are guided by terms of reference approved by Cabinet, and they consider public tenders on the basis of recommendations from the department who put the public tender out and the Secretariat. But if they deem it necessary, they will do their own assessment. This is then taken to government for endorsement, and in some instances where the chairperson deems it necessary, they can present it to Cabinet for a final decision. Government has shown support to the private sector by provisions of incentives, grants and travel opportunities for those in different sectors, but some believe that there are areas that are lacking that need to be addressed.
Without doubt, government has contributed to the private sector development in things such as incentives, such as grants and things like that, overseas travel for executives or members of the private sector in certain industries. That's the contribution that can be seen. That is the I suppose what appears as government's contribution. However, the legal framework and the legal landscape by which we are left to operate is very poor, and there is no legal basis, there is no legal protection, and that is something that we cannot see, because it isn't, visually, it's not a tangible thing that we can see, this business was given a grant, or that person was offered an opportunity to attend a workshop overseas. What is missing is that legal protection. That is the fair rules, the rules for fair competition, having a public procurement policy that is enforced, and that the private sector and businesses can actually use those rules, and just having the laws in place, so that if we have concerns, then we have an option or an avenue to appeal. We don't have that right now. We operate at the mercy of government, at the mercy of government policies, and whatever political influences there are in existence now, we have to live with that. And that is not genuine private sector development. That is not creating that enabling environment for conducive economic growth. That is operating in grey areas, and that is not helpful to private sector development. So I think it is time the government needs to relook at this and seriously look at it, because how can we encourage investment from foreign investors if we don't have the legal framework or the legal protection that is required to operate in a fair, impartial, and fair competition rules for the private sector?
The Niue Chamber of Commerce Board are in the process of putting together a collective response to address the issue that has been put forward. Niue's judiciary has welcomed a new Justice of the Peace who was sworn in last Friday at the Niue Public Service Building. Mrs. Catherine Itwata Papani took the judicial oath of allegiance during a ceremony conducted by Niue High Court Judge Sarah Reeves. This now brings the local judiciary to consist of 2 Justices of the Peace and 10 Commissioners of the Niue High Court. Appointments for such positions are approved by Cabinet on the recommendations from the Justice Department. Mrs. Papani says the appointment is an honour and that she is humbled to take on board the responsibilities for the next 3 years. This week she is attending court proceedings to observe procedures that will familiarise her with due process and prepare her for her new role. The Niue High Court is in session this week with one day set aside for civil and criminal proceedings yesterday morning. Members from the judiciary were also present to observe and familiarise themselves with the application of legislation or law to decisions within the courts. Civil proceedings saw 2 separate applications from companies to be reinstated to the Register of Companies. Memphis Commercial SA Business and Air Latico Company Limited, through legal counsel, presented submissions to the court that noted both companies had been deregistered for failure to comply with payments of fees and were therefore struck off the company's registry. Petitions were presented to restore and re-register. The judge was satisfied with the applications for the restoration of companies on the condition that both companies pay all outstanding fees and arrears to the Register of Companies. In a civil matter between 2 parties, a case was presented to the court for statement of claim to determine the ownership of a tent. Following submissions by both parties, the respondent indicated no interest in the tent, which has been in police custody for a few months due to ongoing disputes. The ruling was that the tent be returned to the plaintiff, and any other matters will be dealt in other land proceedings throughout the week that were not directly related to this matter. 7 criminal charges were also put forward to the High Court, but for 2 high-profile cases, where one relating to the willful mischief to a new police vehicle and another case of negligent driving of a motor vehicle while under the influence of alcohol causing the death of a person. In a case for the middle-aged man facing charges of willful mischief to property, a guilty plea was entered and legal counsel asked for a suspended sentence of 12 months on the grounds that if he was convicted, it would affect his employment status. Police prosecutor also put forward a request for reparation for costs to the damages to the vehicle. Judge Sarah Reeves will take the matter into consideration and will return with a decision on Thursday morning. One individual facing charges of negligent driving causing the death of a person and also being under the influence of alcohol entered a not guilty plea. This case has been deferred to the next High Court sitting due to the amount of time required to present and hear the case that could take up to at least 2 days. That could not be done in this current court sitting. This matter will reappear before the Niue High Court next year. The Niue High Court sessions for the remainder of this week will be focused on land matters. That concludes our news bulletin for this evening.